Hello, Lou Hamilton from Audible Elegance of Cincinnati, Ohio. The background we're using today is a little odd, and that's because I'm in Cleveland, Ohio with my wife. She's up here getting some basic testing done for her transplant and her health. It's customary and normal, so it's not an extraordinary event this time. What triggered this video was I recently went to Sam's Club, and I thought, let's take a look at what they have for television sets, because a lot of people buy their sets in those type of settings, whether it's Best Buy or Costco or Sam's Club, Walmart, And what I was curious about was whether they had any OLED sets, which I personally prefer because the contrast levels are better than QLED or LED type systems. And as I looked through all of the sets, they looked all pretty miserable. And when I finally got over to the OLED, which was a 4K set and that sort of thing, it looked equally miserable. And so I began to start thinking gee, why would I spend the extra money for an OLED set when I can basically get the same picture for a third of the price out of QLED or whatever? And this took me back to something I did years ago when LED first came out and plasma sets were still around. And I was in a Best Buy, and all of the sets look equally miserable. And so I asked for the remote control for the plasma, and fortunately the salesman brought it out. And having been ISF trained, I know what things typically should be, where they should be, and what's going on. What a lot of people don't realize is that most television sets come essentially with what I would call a showroom setting. And the showroom setting is usually cranking the brightness up to 100%. They may crank up the contrast or the sharpness equally so. And what this causes is a sort of bloom or a mess of the image itself. It's not well defined. And the reason that they have this showroom feature is what I call the campfire experience. If you've ever been on a camp out, sooner or later, there's an evening campfire that's built, and everybody sits around it. And think about this for a moment. A lot of times people grow suddenly quiet, and they're just staring into the fire, into the light. And most of nature is attracted to bright lights. Even moths, your porch light, all these bugs flying around because it's light. We are subject as humans to the same frailty that we are attracted to a bright light. So what many of the television manufacturers discovered is if they properly set up their television sets, they weren't as bright as somebody else who basically had a flashlight going on. So the flashlight television sets would always sell, and their set wouldn't. So they learned too, we've got to come out with this showroom design and make it brighter than hell and everything else. So in that type of setting, it's very difficult to distinguish between the quality of the television sets or the type of design drive that's used to do it, or even how they're upscaling. Any of that works. You can't figure any of that out. What makes it even worse is that a lot of times, in order to make the sets equal, they use a common feed. So you have one source, and then you have a distribution amplifier of God knows what quality, as well as God knows what quality the source is, feeding an image to every set. So the consumer can compare the images. Well, The problem is that if the signal feed source is not of great quality, or the distribution amp is not of great quality, the better the television set, the worse the image should look. Whereas a lesser set, they will display the frailties of what's being sent to them. So common feeds are very deceiving. It's most places, all they do is they hire somebody who comes out, plinks the television set on the shelf, plugs in the cable that was there, and away it goes. And so how people can even select a television set under those circumstances is very difficult for me to imagine. What I saw at the Sam's Club, I would have been very hard pressed to buy that OLED set, even though I know it's a vastly superior image to a QLED. So I don't know what to tell people when they go out and they start looking at these things. While we're talking about images, there's something else that goes on, and in my trade, it's known as apparent resolution. And the best way I describe apparent resolution to people is you're out someplace, for guys, you're bar hopping, and you see some girl across the way, and you become interested in that person. And by the time you get over to very close to them, you're not as interested. And what's happening is what I call apparent resolution and true resolution. Your eye will fill in things, so to speak. And this also happens with video. And what is very disturbing to me is that a lot of times when you're looking at a television set, particularly in these club-type atmospheres or, other places where they have a gazillion sets, the usual range that you get to stand back from the television set is 2, 3, maybe 4 feet. And that is not how you watch a television set at home. So being that close, if there's a distinguishing thing between the television sets, you might like what is distinguishing about the quality. However, if you stand back 10, 15 feet, which is not uncommon where people look at their television sets, you'll see that the difference between them is very, very nominal. If you can even tell the difference given a common signal. And this is where this race on numbers, from 1080p to 4K, now it's 8K, and sooner or later it'll be 12K and 100K. When you start going back further and further from the image, that's when you have apparent vision as opposed to fixed. And so you may be essentially fooled into buying a better television set than you actually need. I hate to say it that way, but if you're going to be 15, 20 feet away from a television set, I would be really hard pressed to find the difference between a 4K and an 8K. Now, if you have a gigantic image and you have a true 8K source, well, okay, I can see it maybe. But even then, what becomes a critical factor is that most of the material that you watch is not produced at that level of resolution. So the television manufacturers basically have to step up or upgrade the signal to comply with that 4K or 8K display requirement. And so the quality of those systems really begins to distinguish the difference between some of the television sets. I have to laugh about that because many years ago, when we were privileged to sell what was then the standard of the industry, the Pioneer Elite plasmas, in the early stages, and to give everyone a laugh, the original 50-inch Pioneer Elite plasma sold for $10,000. Now you can get a 50-inch of some form like that for like $327 or something. What a lot of people started complaining about when we sold them those sets is that what those sets were receiving showed up on the screen. And if they were watching some sort of local commercial, I would say commercial, public broadcasting, on a special channel, the mayor's meeting or something like that, the image looked absolutely like crap. And because the television set was capable of much better resolution than the signal it was being sent, and so the image wound up looking like crap. And this relates back to the common feed to all of the sets on the wall. Well, the better set is similarly going to be subject to a crap signal. So you really have to watch out for all of that and think about what you need for your purposes. It works out that way. I mean, when plasma first came out, the sharpest image when plasma first came out was actually the color television set that sat on your kitchen counter, the little 7-inch one, because you couldn't see all the frailties of the image. It was all so compressed. So when you look at television sets, and if you're going to do it out in these clubs or Best Buy or whatever, try to stand back at a distance that you're actually going to look at the set. If you can, get a hold of the remote and, get it out of that showroom mode, whatever you do. They may have a movie mode. They may have many things because there are some presets in a lot of sets. Drop into those modes and begin to look at the image and see what you can figure out. For the most part, I'll bet they won't be accommodating. Probably they have no idea where the remotes are. And for the most part, you're assuming that you can actually find somebody who knows even where the remotes are, or even find somebody on the sales floor. And, at that point, you're really down to what I call chicken marketing, where you just go in and you hunt and peck. So that's what I see in the state of affairs in this sort of club atmospheres and buying television sets. I don't know how you can make an intelligent decision. I don't like relying upon reviews because anymore, many other reviews are paid for, I guess would be a good way of putting it, or sponsored by the manufacturer themselves to promote their brand. It's very, very confusing. I find it very confusing on Google anymore because you got to get past all of the paid ones, and then those who are, associated, with a particular company. They may say, QLED review, but it's only sponsored by the person who makes QLED sets. So good luck with all of that. I can only give you those tips, but my experience in trying to figure out about what television set to buy in a Sam's Club is pretty nightmarish. There we are.